it's difficult to know where to start with you, John. You were sort of credited as being the creator of alternative comedy.
Yeah, well, not by me.
No, how do you feel about that?
Well, it's nonsense, isn't it? I mean, how could... I don't know how that could possibly happen. How could you... What do you sit down at a laboratory somewhere and say, I will take the head of Bob Monkhouse and the shoulders of Jim Bowen, forge them with the body of Tony Allen, and lo and behold, a monster rises from the slab saying nothing of any amusement whatsoever.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say, you started...
I'm just older than anybody else.
But you are, you're in that period between, like, the Redcoats and the Working Men's Club, and before the clubs of the alternative comedy came up. So you were having to find your way to do comedy on your own. I know you were, I know there's comedians who influenced you. Many of them you went to see and you met people. You talk about meeting Spike Milligan.
Yeah.
Who obviously was a huge influence on nearly every comedian that we have today.
Much to his chagrin, I would imagine.
Yes, and seeing Ken Dodd and people like this. So there were comedians around that appealed to you.
Well, yeah, but there weren't many comedians, but there were people like Ivor Cutler, who I mention often, and a guy called Ron Geeson, excuse me, who may be forgotten about seemingly. And there were lots and lots and lots, in my day, if there was a day, lots and lots of theatre groups touring around, doing mostly, they were doing either straight theatre or comedy theatre, and they'd nearly always have a cabaret act, because that would mean more money, which they were doing, if they were playing universities, they were doing student bars, So all that stuff was happening, and that's what I was watching, and I was just thought, well, I'll do that, but I'm not going to waste my time having somebody else come on stage with me. I shall manage to do this on my own somehow. And I used to actually go on tour with some of those guys, General Will Theatre Group, which was formed in Bradford, mainly doing David Edgar plays.
Right.
I went on the road with them and did their cabaret shows. 4 guys. And then they realised in the mid-70s that there were no women in the theatre group experience. So they got 2 in and they fucked the band and disappeared. And that was the end of the General Will. It was the General Willie by then, ha-ha. And also a group called Old Truck Theatre Company, led by Mike Bradwell, who passed over, or died, as we say, quite recently, which is sad. But not for those who knew him. So yeah, I mean those were so I did when this alternative comedy thing started. I just thought, well, what the fuck's all this about? I mean, this is just what people do all the time. I don't see, why this is such a big deal.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it shouldn't have been. And in fact, I do think it shouldn't have been. But I mean, I wouldn't say it shouldn't have been.
So what sort of stuff you mentioned? Sort of starting in the Midland Arts Centre, which is still
kind of started there, but really most of my time was spent at a place called Birmingham Arts Lab,
right,
which was an offshoot of the Midland Arts Centre, because there was no art in the Midlands Arts Centre. There's no art at all. There was a lot of coffee bar activity. I was very good friends with the guy who was the theatre director there, David Gordon. And his complaint about the Midlands Arts Centre was that all it consisted of was young men with long hair in the coffee bar burning holes in polystyrene cups with their cigarettes, having sneaked outside by the lake for a joint.
So, at what point did you think the sort of performance art and transformed into the stand up, and what part did you play? I mean, so did the alternative clubs started springing up? I mean, I know Dave was writing about this, but you sort of had to go from doing an hour down to doing sort of 20 minutes.
Just before.
Take the mic away from him.
Right, that's it. Thanks, John. Nice to have had you here. See you later. Just to give a little bit of historical context here, was the. In the early 70s, I think there was this kind of the growth of the sort of the music and comedy interaction, really, I think, and it was punk, really, I would say, the sort of mid 70s punk, And I've just sort of behind John, I can see is a picture of the first record by Factory Records in Manchester, and that featured Joy Division, Duty Column. Was it A Certain Ratio and John Dowie? And that was actually my introduction to John. Was through punk, through that record. It was like, NME saying, "Oh, this is a great record," and everybody's going, and all these people saying, "Oh, wow, Dave, you've got the first Joy Division record." I said, no, it's John Dowie. That's what I got it for, and I think that's kind of what I suppose the sort of people like Rick Mail and Alexi Sale came out of as well.
Before this started, Dave said, "I'll just chip in."
Well, he's chipped.
Another thing.
He's chipped.
That was a bag of chips and fish on the side.
I'm the guy. I'm the desk countdown guest person.
Yes.
I'll give you the historical context, and then I'll shut up.
We can get some context. So, did it feel, John, when you were doing this stuff, like it was leading somewhere? What were you hoping to achieve in those early days when all this was?
Just to earn enough. There was a friend of mine who lived in Morocco. Well, a friend of mine was from Morocco, and she told me about two friends of hers who used to make jewellery. And every morning the market would open. They'd go along to the market and they'd lay out their stall and they'd put their jewels on it, their rings and bangles and stuff. And then people would come along and they'd sell a few. And when they'd sold enough to buy a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread and a lump of cheese, they'd shut the shop and go and sit in the Moroccan hills. Yeah. And that's what I think that's what I do. That was my ambition. Yeah. Just enough to buy a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine. No thou, though. Thou is not required. And it would be pointless having an ambition in those days, because there's no way it would be met. No. You couldn't say, "Oh, this time tomorrow I'll be playing Aldershot Arts Centre." These things didn't, you couldn't. So it was just hanging out with your mates, having a good time, and earning enough to pay the rent. Yeah. Which I still owe, by the way.
And you were doing the Edinburgh Fringe with your shows?
Yeah, I did 71 and 72. I went up to Edinburgh. I don't know why I stopped going there. I think because of the company. I don't know. I did do it. I had a good time there. I don't know why I didn't go back until it became obvious, Well, yeah, when everybody else was going up there.
But it must have been. I mean, it feels different. I first went up in 1987, and the Fringe feels like a very different thing since then. So I imagine the difference between 1971 and 1987 was even more pronounced.
Pronounced, LIMP. The only thing I could say about it was that when I went up, I was the only comedy show in the Fringe brochure. Wow. One man. Such. Yeah. So you won the Perrier Award that year, is it? I know there wasn't one. Just a little bit too early before everything sort of got established. I said somewhere that the only time comedians in Edinburgh ever touch water is when it's attached to the Perrier Award. Could you hold this bottle for me while we take your photograph? What's in it? Water. Keep it away. You know what happens in water? W.C. Fields. Why doesn't W.C. Fields drink water? Fish fucking it. Yeah. Do you want a bottle of this fish fucking it water award? So was it recognised? Would you call what you were doing stand-up comedy? I mean, I called it one-man theatrical comedy experience. Yeah. There's there somewhere. Right. I mean, there's an amazing museum room of all the many things you've done here. Some lovely. Some of them, yeah. Well, all of them, yeah, but not much. It's just that this is where I'm going to die. So I thought, well, I needn't carry this stuff around anymore. I can unpack it. It's great. Stick it on the wall. It's a terrific thing to have, and it's a nice thing to have. I agree. Yeah. It's just pictures and posters and records, books.